Hey everyone, welcome back to RetroBreak. Today we're going to be shining a spotlight on Sony. I'm going to be covering all of their main home consoles, as well as their two handheld releases, the PSP and the PlayStation Vita, and for each system I'll cover some of my fondest memories, as well as some of my favourite games that I've discovered throughout the years as well. So let's get started with their first home console, the PlayStation 1. And this is the first Sony console that I ever had as well. I didn't get it on launch day or anything, and I was very much a Nintendo kid, but we did have a PlayStation 1 in the house. And I've picked out some of my favourite games from back in the day too, but back then the games didn't look like that. I've actually got one of the original discs. So yeah, this is the games that I grew up with. They were just CDRs on our modded PlayStation 1, obviously. I would have so much fun just playing these games, and we had so many of them as well. We had a big folder full, as I'm sure a lot of you watching did too. But since that time I have gone back and actually bought some for myself. So there was one that I always used to go and play, and that was called Music, or the music creation for the PlayStation, if you want its full title. Basically, this was like a console version of a piece of PC software that I used to love called EJ, and it let you drag in various different elements of songs and music and sort of drum beats and loops, and you could stack them all up on this timeline and press a button to play your song, and it was just so much fun. And as well as making the songs on this, I always used to love just booting it up and watching all of the different visualizers. They were just so appealing and so sort of psychedelic and crazy, and I'd never seen effects like that coming from the SNES or the NES, so it really was mind-blowing at the time, and it was really fun to revisit it for this video as well. I haven't played around on this since I was a kid, so it was great fun to go back and take a listen to this song that I came up with. Now, this is an interesting one. The whole reason that I bought this game to begin with was because of the music, and I still feel like this is my favourite piece of music from any game on the original PlayStation. The game in question is Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness, and while the game isn't that great, just listen to this tune. I was just obsessed with it back then, and I have no idea why. Now here's an interesting one. This is Dancing Stage Party Edition, and I had a bunch of these. I used to love playing around on the dance mat, but there's a very particular reason why I've chosen to talk about this in today's video, and that is because it does hold a special memory for me personally. So when I was learning to drive, I would always be really nervous before the lessons, and playing this game and going on the dance mat before the driving instructor turned up really helped to calm my nerves. I don't know what it was, but just getting up and moving, I think, and just getting the blood pumping before, instead of just waiting around for the doorbell, which was making me so anxious, I would put this game on and just dance around, and it would really just help rid my mind of having to wait for the driving instructor. So it's a really fun memory, and it's thanks to that I'm as good at DDR as I am today. So really fun memory that, and I really wish they still made DDR games for the home. I know they're in the arcades, but it's not the same really. And then two of the games that I actually did play as a kid quite a lot, and for some reason they're both number 2. For some reason I always find that the second game in the trilogy is usually the best one. We have an open world platformer with Spyro 2, and we have a linear level to level platformer with Crash 2, and they are both absolute masterclasses in game design and easily the best in their respective series. And even as a kid I could tell that these were just incredibly high quality games, and they were easily as good as anything that I was enjoying on the N64 at the time as well. And they're still the two that I go back to in their series today, and I just love playing them, and I could never get bored of either of these games. And now for some of the games that I've played more recently that I really think deserve more love. Let's start off here with Jade Cocoon, and I played this one on stream earlier this year or maybe last year, and I absolutely fell in love with it. It has that really classic fantasy, almost fairy tale style aesthetic to it, and the voice acting was great. The progression through the game and raising the monsters to fight in the battles was just so much fun, and I really haven't played another RPG quite like it from that time period. It holds up incredibly well and the atmosphere is so good, so really highly recommend Jade Cocoon. And I do have the second one on the PlayStation 2 as well, but I haven't played it just yet, so let me know in the comments whether you've played this one. Next is a game that I played for the first time in uni, which was about 10 maybe 12 years ago at this point, and that game is Medieval. And once again, what an incredible game this is. I know a lot of people who grew up with the PlayStation 1 had this game as a kid and really loved it, and I actually picked it up from a recommendation from a friend, and while I was playing it, even though I'd never actually played it back in the day, I could just feel the nostalgia oozing from this game. It's just so incredibly well made, and there's just so many memorable things about this, from the character to the way that you fight and interact with everything in the environment, the really wacky animations and just the atmosphere again. It just all boils together to make one of the coolest games on the system, and it also got a remake on the PlayStation 4, which I really enjoyed as well. But nothing for me quite feels as good as the wobbly pixels of the original. So if you want a really cool and unique third-person 3D action platformer kind of game, definitely get Medieval. It's easily one of the best games on the system. Next was another recommendation from a friend, this time a few years earlier from college. This is Alundra, which is basically PlayStation's answer to the top-down Legend of Zelda games, and it is so good. It's a lot more difficult than Zelda, and I think it was made for a slightly older audience as well. But with that, you get some really interesting and engrossing storylines with a lot more adult themes. And the cool thing about this game is that you go into different people's dreams, and then that's sort of the dungeon aspect of it, but there's also a whole overworld as well. It all flows together really well. It's got very nice 32-bit style, almost pixel art graphics. They're kind of pixel art, but they're also kind of like hand-drawn sprites, but because of the resolution, it looks like pixel art. I don't really know how to describe it. Kind of like how games on the Sega Saturn that are still 2D but aren't quite pixels look. It's a really unique style anyway, and the second game was completely different, and I don't really recommend that one very much, but the first game was absolutely fantastic. And I always like showing this sticker off on these videos. Look at that Lee's Games sticker right there. That's one of my favourite game shops up in Morecambe, and it is still around, so if you're ever in the area, check out the shop. And I'm sure the game's a lot more expensive than that these days, but definitely try and track it down if you like those sort of top-down 2D action RPG games. And for another action game, this time a very different style of game. This was kind of a unofficial sequel to Flashback and Another World. This is called Heart of Darkness, and this is another one that I played through at uni. Absolutely loved this from start to finish. It has some of the coolest graphics on the entire system, and there's actually a really interesting development story behind this game as well. The developers really struggled to make this game, and the fact that it came out as good as it did on the PlayStation 1 is just a testament to the designer's abilities to pull off something on such a big scale that still plays really well too. It's just so cool. It's very different to anything else on the system. You have to kind of go back to the Mega Drive and experience things like Flashback, but even then, they're not quite the same as Heart of Darkness, and it is my favourite in that kind of unofficial series as well. Definitely recommend it, but do be warned, you will be in for a challenge with this one. And now let's move on to Sony's second home console, the PlayStation 2. This particular PlayStation 2 is one that I picked up at a gaming market maybe a few years ago now, and it comes with this hard drive here filled with games, and more importantly, right there, it also has HDMI out, which has been great for capturing games and for playing them on modern displays as well. But as for the PS2 itself, I first got mine in college, which was around 2008, and before that point I wasn't a huge fan of the PlayStation 1, so I was never really that interested in getting the PS2. I was always more interested in the GameCube and the Wii, but when I got my PS2, 2008 was the perfect time to get it because the games were dirt cheap, and I picked up some incredible games as well. So let's start off here with some of the first games that I ever played on the system. In fact, let's go back a bit further and start with the first game that I ever played on it, before I even owned my own copy. So I had a friend who got a PlayStation 2, either on launch or very close to launch, and one of the games that he would play a lot was the original SSX. And when I first saw this game, my mind was just completely blown. Coming from, at the time, I think the best console, if you could say the best, was the Nintendo 64. So to see this running so smoothly and in such a high resolution, and the thing that impressed me even more than the graphics was the songs. They actually had lyrics and the characters were talking, and I was just like, how is this possible in a video game? I was just blown away, and since that point the SSX series has become one of my favourite game series of that generation, and I would love to do a retrospective at some point. Well, I did do one like 15, 16 years ago, but it kind of sucks. So I would like to do an updated version at some point. But yeah, absolutely love the first game in the series, and it brings back so many great memories every time I go back and play it. And then when I got my system for the first time, I was looking for some of the best games to play on the system, and obviously, pretty much the #1 game on the system, as suggested by 90% of the people out there, is Shadow of the Colossus. So I think this was actually the first game that I played on my PlayStation 2 when I got it, and what a game to start with. This game's just incredible. Even in 2008 standards, it still blew me away with the graphics and the atmosphere, and this box is really nice too. So it's got this nice cardboard sleeve here, and then some incredible artwork on the inside if we fold that out. Look how nice that looks, and on the inside as well. And it did come with some art cards, but over the years I've lost them somehow. But even so, what an incredible start to the PlayStation 2 library for me, and I can see why people revere this game so highly. It is just an incredible experience from start to finish, and obviously it's got remade over the years, but there's something about the low resolution and the slow frame rate of the PlayStation 2 game that really makes you feel like they're pushing the system way beyond its limits, to be honest, and it is just an incredible sight to behold playing on original hardware. There is no better way to play it, in my opinion. And then after experiencing Shadow of the Colossus, I went back and checked out the developer's previous game called Eco, and I loved it even more. So the PlayStation 2 easily solidified itself as one of my favourite consoles of all time by that point. Eco is just a masterpiece of game design. It really is. The entire game, for me, just feels like one big massive Zelda dungeon. And I am an incredibly huge fan of Zelda, in particular the dungeons and the puzzles. So from the minute I started this game until the minute I finished this game, I was just lost in its world. I was enjoying its puzzles so much. I enjoyed the intricacies of the level design and the subtle storytelling. It really is a masterclass. And in my opinion, it's a better game than Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus has the spectacle that brings in the masses and the fans, and that's why it gets such high praise. But the game design and the gameplay of Eco is really what sells it to me, and there is, honestly, no better game on the system from a gameplay and game design point of view. It really is in a league of its own. Another game that I was really excited to get around the time that I picked up my own system was Klonoa 2 Lunatea's Veil. And I'd been reading about some of the best games to get for the system, and I'm a massive fan of 2D and 2.5D platformers, and this one sounded like the best of the bunch on the console, and I was not disappointed. In fact, I was incredibly impressed. I really wondered why Nintendo hadn't made a 2D game like this for the GameCube, or to be honest, any other company. The only 2.5D platformer that I can think of for the GameCube that's not Jungle Beat with the bongos is the Bonk's Adventure or Bonk's Revenge game that came out in Japan for the GameCube, but apart from that, this is by far the best 2.5D platformer of the generation, and it's one of my favourite games of all time now. In fact, I've included it on several lists in the past on this channel, and I also streamed the Switch version when it came out as part of the collection, so if you want to see my thoughts about this game, there's plenty of ways of doing so, and you can actually watch me play through the entire thing as well. But what an incredible game it is. Absolutely love it, and once again it solidified my love for the PlayStation 2. And then, as for some of the games that I picked up after the fact over the years, one of them was Burnout 3, and what an incredible game this is. The music is just fantastic. It's still one of my favourite game soundtracks of all time, and the gameplay is just incredible. It's so fast, it's so responsive. I love the world map where you go around to the different events, and the way the game is structured is just so good. These days, I do like to say that Burnout 2 is better than Burnout 3, but the one that I have the fondest memories of, and the one that I played so much back on the PlayStation 2 before I got the PS3, was Burnout 3. Absolutely amazing. I was kind of sad it didn't come out on the GameCube, but what can you do? Another game that I was very interested to check out was Kingdom Hearts 2, and I'm so glad that I did, because I actually had this game for a long time, in fact not long after I got the system, but for whatever reason I kept putting it off, and eventually, one day I just decided to put it in and try it for 5 minutes. And then about 5 hours later, it turned out that it was an incredible game and I shouldn't have waited, and it quickly became one of my favourite game series. And since that point I went back and played all of the other games in the series, and the story still makes no sense to me, but I really loved playing Kingdom Hearts 2, and it introduced me to such an incredible game franchise. And I'm really looking forward to the fourth one, whenever that comes out. I think they've forgot about it at this point. Here's an interesting one. This is a game that I found out about thanks to a bunch of memes online around the time in college, and I was really curious about this game. It looked like a SNES game, but it was on the PlayStation 2 and it was full of innuendo and weird anime tropes. And I finally found out what it was. The game was called Artanelico. This one's called Melody of Alemia. Here's the one I got first. I actually played the second one before playing the first one, but it didn't really matter much story-wise, and I really loved the style of the games. And because of that, I actually went out and found all of the different Atelier games. So we have Atelier Iris 2, Atelier Iris 3, Atelier Iris 1, and of course Manichemia, my all-time favourite game on the PlayStation 2, but I won't cover that in this video because I've already gushed about it so many times in the past, and I will do a dedicated video at some point in the future. But just know that Gust on the PlayStation 2, this generation of games that they made, is easily some of my favourite JRPGs of all time, and they really do have such a unique style that's never been replicated, and I just love that art style. The basic 2D sprites on the basic 3D environments, mixed with some incredible soundtracks, some of the best characters and the best battle systems that I've ever experienced in any JRPG. It was a recipe for success, and I really don't think Gust's 3D games are as good as any of these, to be honest. So it's a bygone era, but definitely check them out. If you're into your JRPGs, you really can't go wrong with any of these. Now, instead of going to the PlayStation 3, let's go to the PlayStation Portable instead, because that's the next console I got. And I didn't end up getting mine until the third revision. This is the PSP 3000. And the reason I got this one is because I bought it alongside Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, and as I said, I'd fallen in love with the Kingdom Hearts series at that point, and this game was incredible. To play a game of console quality caliber on a portable handheld was again mind-blowing, so thank you Sony for blowing my mind so many times over the years. What an amazing game, and what an amazing system as well. Coming from the DS and the Game Boy Advance, seeing that jump in graphical quality was really impressive. The games themselves I actually prefer on the DS and the Game Boy Advance for the most part, but it's not to say that I didn't have a lot of fun with the PSP. And here's the back of the PSP. This was actually drawn for me by a friend at uni, and I've got this really nice case that keeps the screen protected, so you can actually flip it up like that. And the screen is in such good condition for its age as well. And if we open up the UMD slot, there's actually a sticker back there as well. As you can see, I was a little bit Miku obsessed back then. But yeah, loved the PSP, loved Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, but what other games did I play around the same time? Well, there was actually two games that I'd played on someone else's PSP before I got my own one. So, Locoroco and Lumines, and I'm sure if you've played a PSP before, neither of these games need any introduction. Locoroco is one of the most imaginative and fun 2D platformers that's ever been created. I actually first played the demo version of this on a friend's PSP console, and we enjoyed that demo so much. We would spend hours just going back and forth and finding every little secret in that level, and I loved the music on the demo game as well, and I was kind of sad that the music in the demo isn't used anywhere in the full version of the game. But I still really loved it, and I've loved all of the sequels since then as well. And the other game, Lumines, is an absolute puzzle classic, made by Tetsuya Mizuguchi, who I did an entire documentary on, and one of the reasons that I did that documentary was my love of Lumines on the PSP. What an awesome concept. It's so simple, but the execution, the amount of polish in this game is just second to none. And they made so many sequels, but still, it's the first one on the PSP that really deserves all the attention, and it's definitely a fantastic game from Q Entertainment, and it went on to spawn so many different sequels, and I'm sure it helped keep them in business too. Really is an amazing game, so absolutely loved both of these early releases for the PSP. And as for some of the later games, obviously with my Miku addiction I ended up picking up all of the Project Diva games. This one is, in my opinion, the best of the bunch on the PSP. This is Project Diva 2nd, and they included so many more tracks from the first game. There was a whole load more customizable options, and there was a few more gameplay tweaks as well, like holding down the buttons. And there was an extra difficulty mode in Extreme as well, which was great because I'd already 100%ed the first game in the series. So this one was everything that I was looking for back then, and I played it for hundreds of hours, and I actually almost 100%ed this one on Extreme as well. There's just a few songs which are just way too difficult, I think, for any human to accomplish. And two other games that I played a lot later in the system's life before I got the Vita. One of them was Trails in the Sky, The Legend of Heroes, and what an incredible JRPG this is. This just has such an incredible atmosphere, and one of my favourite battle systems and music in a battle as well. It's just the perfect RPG, and I really can't wait for the Switch remake that's coming out next year. It looks incredible. Like I said, I love the style of these games. I love those 2D sprites on 3D backgrounds. But the remake on the Switch just looks out of this world good. It really does look amazing. It's everything that I pictured this game was in my head when I was playing it back then. Definitely one of my favourite RPGs of all time, and I haven't really put the time in to play any of the other Legend of Heroes games, but if they're as good as this one, I really need to find the time to do that one day. I'm a massive fan of the Mega Man series. Mega Man X is one of my favourite games ever, so when I found out there was a 3D or 2.5D remake of the first X game for the PlayStation Portable, I jumped at the chance to play it, and it was incredible. This was actually the first time that I've actually played all the way to the end of Mega Man X, and I think they did a brilliant job of taking the SNES game, making it widescreen, making the remixed music, which was just amazing as well. It just plays so well, and I have a great memory when I was on a holiday with my family and we were camping out in a tent, and I had my PSP with me and I played all the way through Maverick Hunter X. It is a great memory, it is a great game, and honestly it's one of the best games in the entire Mega Man series, and I would actually say play this over the SNES original. It is that good, and that is quite rare for a modern remake of a classic game to actually be better than the original, so definitely check this out if you like Mega Man. Alright, next up is the PlayStation 3, which is a lot heavier than I remembered. This is definitely the heaviest system that we've got so far. And again, not a system I got on day one. I got this one for Christmas one year, maybe 2011 or 2012, whenever this revision of the system came out. And I actually got a bunch of games that I didn't really want with it, so I ended up trading them all in and got a bunch of games that I was a lot more interested in. So let's take a look at some of those first games that I ever played on my PlayStation 3. So the first game that I played on my PlayStation 3 was Child of Eden, and I was already a big fan of Tetsuya Mizuguchi, as I'd said from Lumines on the PSP, and obviously Rez on the Dreamcast as well. So Child of Eden, I was already very, very excited to play this game, and it did not disappoint. Again, the psychedelic visuals were incredible. I was a big fan of Genki Rockets already, so to hear their music in all of the stages was just so cool for me. It was so exciting. The gameplay, I felt, was actually slightly a step back from Rez, but they more than made up for it with the different environments and the music and the themes behind the levels, and with Tetris Effect a bit later on, which we might cover in the PS4 section. It really was just the next evolution in that kind of interactive media experience. It's kind of hard to call it a game in some ways, but what it is, they pulled it off spectacularly. And a few years later I actually got a 3D TV and the Move controllers, and I was able to play it in 3D with PlayStation Move, and it was just an incredible experience. It was kind of like the best you could get before VR became a reality, really. So very, very fond memories of Child of Eden. And again, check out my Mizuguchi documentary if you want to hear more about this game and some of the development and history behind it too. Another early game I got for the system was Castlevania Lords of Shadow, and I'm a big fan of the Castlevania games, especially the Game Boy Advance ones. In fact, at this point I'd actually already finished all of the Game Boy Advance and DS Castlevania games. So I was really curious to see how a 3D entry in the series played. I'd kind of played the N64 one a little bit and didn't really think much of it. This one is good in some ways, but in a lot of ways, I didn't really feel like it felt like a Castlevania game. I know it was probably very difficult to take that original Castlevania gameplay and put it in 3D, but more than anything, this felt like a weird spiritual sequel to God of War or something, which I wasn't against, and it was a fun game, but for me it didn't really feel like Castlevania, and I had that problem with the second one as well. And then obviously Mercury Steam also made the 3DS one, which kind of goes back to Castlevania gameplay, but also not really. So I have very mixed feelings about this game. I enjoyed it at the time, and you know, it's well made, it's very well made in fact. The graphics still hold up very well today. But for a Castlevania game, I was a little bit disappointed. And the third game, which I enjoyed a lot more, and as I mentioned on the PS2, I was a big fan of the Burnout series, so I picked up Burnout Paradise. Yes, it is the Ultimate Edition, even though for some reason it's not in the box for that version. What an awesome game this is. I've actually finished it many times on many different systems at this point. I've played it all the way through on the PS3. I did the same again on the PS4 with the Enhanced Edition. I did it on the Switch, and I think I've played it through on the PC as well, so that's 4 times that I've played Burnout Paradise, and it's so sad that it's still the most recent game in the series. EA surely still has the license, and the new Need for Speed games don't fill that void. Get back to Burnout, I really wish they would. It's an incredible franchise, and it's so sad to see it die the slow death that it did. Burnout Crash that came out on PSN was just a throwaway game really, and there hasn't been a new game in the series since this one came out in 2009, I think it was? 2007, even earlier. Crazy. Come on EA, what are you playing at? We need a new Burnout game. Now for some of the games that I picked up a bit later on. Let's start off with kind of a controversial game. This was Beyond Two Souls, and I actually first found out about this game at Gamescom when I went there for the first time. I had an incredible time at the show. I did a vlog on this channel actually back then, which was like 12, 13 years ago at this point. And I was very excited to play a game that was so story heavy, because I really enjoyed story in games, but honestly, there hasn't really been that many up until this point. And when I put Beyond Two Souls in, first of all, I was blown away by the graphics. I'd never seen anything look this good, this smooth, this fluid before. The story really sucked me in as well. I know some people don't like the direction that it takes, but I think it's really, really cool. I loved all of the sort of mystery around it and the sci-fi elements. And it's probably my favourite in that series, which is Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls and Detroit Become Human. Really loved it. In fact, I loved it so much that I actually based some of my final year dissertation at university on this game, and that was all about narrative and storytelling. So it really does mean a lot to me, and I really enjoyed it from start to finish. And when I'd finished the game and had a look online at some of the responses of other people, I was actually quite surprised to see some of the negative comments about this game. So let me know your experience with it down in the comments. I'd be really interested to hear a different point of view with this one, because I was very surprised. Another game that's just universally acclaimed by everyone is the Tomb Raider reboot. And I got this one on day one, the day it came out, and it was just fantastic. Me and my girlfriend actually stayed up all night. We stayed up overnight from the minute we got this game until sunrise in the morning and played through the entire game from start to finish in one go. We ordered a takeaway at midnight, and I remember sat there on my double bed with my brand new TV in front of me, just playing through this, eating chicken and chips and just having a fantastic time. And that is such a great memory, and it is by far one of the best games of that generation. I enjoyed the other 2 games that came out after, but really this first one was such a breath of fresh air at the time, and it really was the push that the series needed to take it into that generation of systems. And this last one won't come as no surprise. Obviously, the best game on the system, I think it's fair to say. This is The Last of Us, and again it's another game I got on day one. I'd dabbled in the Uncharted games before that. I think I'd played through 2 and 3 at that point, and I watched a friend play through the first one, so I was familiar with Naughty Dog's style, but I was not ready for the emotional impact that this game would have. And just like Beyond, which I was talking about a minute ago, the storytelling in this game is just on another level. I know people again these days like to complain about it, and maybe the reception sort of dulled in the years that have followed, but for the time, it really was a game-changing game. Not in terms of gameplay, but in terms of everything else around the game. There really was no better experience on that generation of systems. And again, it really blew my mind in the graphics department. And I know that Naughty Dog had to pull off a lot of tricks to get it working as good as it does on the PlayStation 3. But I think it still holds up really well today. Like if you compare the original to the PS5 new Part 1 version, it really doesn't look a million miles away. And I still think the PS3 in general feels like a very modern system, especially when developers really went the extra mile and put the system to its full capabilities. You got some absolute masterpieces like this, and the PS3 is one of my favourite Sony consoles because of that. And now it's time to move on to the PlayStation 4, or as the one I've got here is the PlayStation 4 Pro, because I actually sold my original in order to upgrade to this when God of War came out, which was an incredible game. But let's rewind a little bit back to when I got my original PlayStation 4, which I got very close to launch day. And one of the first games that I played on that system was The Evil Within. And I've got a great story to go alongside this as well. So before the game came out, we actually went to a game lock-in, which is basically where you go there at midnight, they shut the doors, and they basically have a row of TVs set out for you to play a new game. And the game at the time was The Evil Within. So I actually played it before it came out, and I also cosplayed as one of the characters shortly after the game came out as well, because I enjoyed it that much. And I really enjoyed the second game as well, and I really thought this was going to be the start of a long-running series, but it seems like it was just those two, and then nothing's really going to happen from then on. But even so, really enjoyed my time with both of these. And I had actually played it on the PlayStation 3 as well, so to see the upgrade from the 3 to the 4 was kind of cool. It wasn't really a massive jump like it was from the 2 to the 3, but still, it was a nice improvement. To play it at full HD instead of 720 and with a smoother frame rate was still nice. So, great game, great start to the system. Another early game that I got for the PS4 that I really enjoyed was this one here. This is one of the Wipeout collections. I love Wipeout. I love the Wipeout series. I loved the one on the PS3, especially playing it in 3D, and it was kind of sad that the 3D support went away with the PS4. But this was great. This was basically taking all of the stuff that came from the PS3 version and adding in all of the stuff that came from the Vita version as well. So it really was like the ultimate Wipeout experience for me. Great game, incredible graphics. You could really see what the PS4 was capable of with this as well. So really enjoyed this at the time. And then of course God of War came out and I upgraded to the PS4 Pro, which we've got right there. And this one is actually signed. As you can see, this is Sarah's copy. So it says "Feed us" from Kratos himself, so that's really cool to have. An incredible game, kind of like The Last of Us on the PlayStation 3. This really just showed how far gaming had progressed. It was really the start of a new generation of those kind of cinematic experience games, and I had a great time with it. I haven't played the sequel just yet, and I really need to try and do that at some point soon. And as for some of my other favourite games from that generation, or at least the ones that were most memorable experiences for me at the time, Final Fantasy Remake absolutely blew me away. At this point I had played Final Fantasy VII. I didn't play the original when it was new, I actually played it during uni and I really enjoyed it. So to see what they did to just improve it for the PlayStation 4 was a very impressive game, very impressive experience. I loved the small scale of it actually. A lot of people don't really like Part 1 because of it's all just set in a city, but I thought it was great. It really gave you a chance to interact with all the characters and do a bunch of different side quests and just to engross yourself in that world. So really enjoyed playing through Final Fantasy VII Remake. Another RPG that I really enjoyed on the PlayStation 4, and this is perhaps my favourite RPG of that generation. This is Tales of Berseria, and I'm a big fan of the Tales series. I loved Symphonia, it was on the GameCube, I loved that one. I loved Vesperia on the 360, but this one is definitely the best of the bunch. And I did play Arise as well, but I didn't think Arise was anywhere near as good as Berseria. In terms of the story at least, there really was something about this character's, in particular Magilou. I just loved her. It's such a great game, such a great cast of characters, and it's very, very traditional in terms of the gameplay structure and the battle system. It just all wraps it up in a really nice package, and obviously that incredible soundtrack from Sakuraba as well, which is just a staple of the Tales series. It really is the best game in the series in my opinion. And finally, I wanted to touch on PlayStation VR because that was a big part of my experience with the PlayStation 4 and a big reason why I upgraded to the Pro as well for the better VR performance. Astrobot VR was incredible. The first time I put this on and just was able to look around in this 3D platformer environment was really an eye-opening experience. It was so different to anything else that I'd experienced back then. I loved the PSVR version 1. It was just an incredible experience. It's how I played Beat Saber, it's how I played Tetris Effect, it's how I played Astrobot and a bunch of other racing games. Just such a great add-on, such a great accessory for the system. And it's such a shame what's happened with PSVR 2. I bought the VR 2, I guess we'll cover it in a little bit, but for now, let's just say PSVR 1 was one of my favourite things in gaming at the time, and things like Astrobot really helped that become a reality, and Farpoint as well with the gun controller, and Trackmania as well with its VR levels. It was so cool! I loved PSVR 1. I was playing it most of the time in the flat, probably more than I played on the regular PS4. I just loved it so much. And now for Sony's next handheld, the PlayStation Vita. And although I wanted one at launch, it was actually a few years later that I finally picked up my own one from Japan. And of course, if the camera will focus, there we go, it is the Miku edition. As you can see, there she is on the back. And of course, the game that I was most excited to play was the next game in the Project Diva series, which in this case is Project Diva F. And in some ways, although I loved the game and the graphics were just way better than the PSP game, there was a few reasons that I felt like this one was actually slightly worse. It had a smaller selection of songs, and the songs that were chosen weren't really as well known as the songs in second. So in some ways I really enjoyed my time with F, but in other ways I feel like it was a bit of a step backwards from the PSP game. That was until F Second came out, and I got this one straight away, and this one was a massive improvement in every regard from the first F game. This one brought back all of my favourite songs from the PSP game, and it was a lot smoother as well. The graphics are amazing, and the buttons on the Vita compared to the PSP, man, these buttons are so satisfying. They are honestly the perfect handheld buttons for me. Like, if you can hear that on the camera, they're so satisfying to use. The feel of the system, the OLED screen, the touch bar on the back for Diva, and the flicking the analog sticks. It just made for one of my favourite handheld gaming experiences. And of course I got Diva X as well, but it really is F Second that's the best of the bunch for that system in my opinion. And it really made me feel like I made the right decision in picking up a PlayStation Vita, because I played these for hundreds of hours I think at this point. And another game that I really loved on the Vita was Steins Gate. And Steins Gate Zero as well, but it really was the first one that sucked me in. I'd already seen the anime, but I'd never actually played the visual novel, so to be able to play it on a handheld with such a nice screen like this, and Steins Gate, the game, the anime, the story is so good, especially once you really get involved in it and you learn all the technical details and the way the story changes depending on the choices that you make throughout the game. It really is an engrossing adventure, and it definitely is great to play it on the PlayStation Vita too. And as for some of the other games that I've found for the system to play over the years, here's 3 really great ones. So we'll start off with Super Monkey Ball Banana Splits, which is actually one of the best games in the entire Super Monkey Ball franchise. And I was so impressed with this game, it really was up there with the GameCube games for me personally, and it's such a shame that it's stuck on the Vita where not that many people could play it. So if you are interested in the Super Monkey Ball series, it's definitely worth trying to find a way to play this game. It is so much better than most of the modern games in the series. Next was a game in the Ys series. This is Ys Memories of Celceta, Ys 6 I think, and I know I've said this so many times in this episode, but I am a fan of the Ys games. I love the top-down action adventure. In a way it kind of reminds me of a much faster version of Alundra. This one was cool in the fact that you've got different characters that you can switch between, but it still has all that classic Ys gameplay. The first one I ever played was the PlayStation 2 one, and this one feels like a great evolution of that style of game. I love the fast-paced combat, and I love the different characters, and of course the music, as always in these Falcom games, is just next level incredible. Seriously, the Ys games, maybe next to Castlevania, are right up there as some of the best game soundtracks of all time, so definitely check this one out. I think it also came out on the PlayStation 4 as well if you want a console experience. A game that pushed the Vita to its limits. It used all of the different features of the Vita, which was actually quite rare. This game is Tearaway, and what a unique game this is. It was made by the same team that made Little Big Planet, but I actually much prefer Tearaway. I never enjoyed the physics of Little Big Planet, and although it was cool what you could do with the stages, it really wasn't that fun to play. But Tearaway, on the other hand, is great fun to play, and it really feels like a Nintendo game on a Sony system in some ways. It's so unique in its stage design and the way it uses the back touch panel to sort of lift things up, and it even uses the front-facing camera, which was a really nice surprise. Just a really cool game, very unique, and it really goes to show what the Vita was capable of. And it's such a shame that Sony didn't really support it further, and third parties weren't really that interested outside of Japan in making games for it. But I loved the system, I really did. And I would love to see Sony make a return to handhelds as well. I really think the PSP and the Vita were great systems. And now for the PlayStation 5, which is insanely heavy compared to all the other systems, and insanely big as well. This is like 3 PlayStation 3's worth of weight in one. That's insane. I literally had no idea it was that heavy until I've compared it to all the other ones. In terms of games though, honestly I'm not that impressed so far, but let's have a look at what I got. And by the way, this was the first PlayStation that I actually got on day one. On launch day we had it pre-ordered and somehow we managed to get it. We didn't really try very hard, but we ended up getting it anyway. And one of the games that I got at launch was Dirt 5. And I like my racing games, I'm a big fan of arcade style racing games, and I just thought this one was okay. It seems really easy even for arcade racing game standards. I had to put it on hard, and even then it seemed too easy. Like, although it's a rally game, it doesn't really feel like you ever lose control of the car, even if you turn off all the steering assist. It's got a cool vibe, but after going back and playing some of the earlier games in the Dirt series, it definitely is one of the weaker entries in the series, but still, it was a new system, it was kind of fun. I didn't really see a big jump in quality from the PlayStation 4, in fact there was some frame rate issues that I thought were quite frustrating and annoying to see on a brand new system, so not the best start for the PlayStation 5, but it did improve slightly. Another early game that I played was Returnal, and this one definitely showed what the PS5 was capable of. This game actually makes me think a lot of the Metroid Prime series in terms of its graphic style and the way the environments are structured, although this one is one of those sort of roguelike games where you die and repeat and you slightly get further and further each time. But I love the gameplay in this, I love the fast-paced third-person action, and the fact that it kind of incorporates shoot 'em up and bullet hell style gameplay as well was right up my street, and I loved the aesthetic as well, and finding out all the different mysteries as you go is really cool. So still one of my favourite games on the system to this day, and an incredible showcase for what the system was capable of. And another early release for the PS5 that I loved was the Crisis Core remake. I'd heard really good things about it, and I did have it on the PSP, but I never really played it for more than a few hours, and this was the first time that I sat down and properly allowed myself to get engrossed in the Crisis Core story, and what an incredible story it is. This is my favourite Final Fantasy story so far. I had tears rolling down my face by the end of this game. Zack is my favourite Final Fantasy character now, and I'm so sad with Rebirth that I still haven't seen him yet, and I got a little bored of that game to be honest, but Crisis Core was amazing from start to finish, and I really need to go back and try and play more of Rebirth, but there was just something about the structure of Crisis Core that I really enjoyed that I'm really not enjoying in Rebirth. I don't know whether that's just me being a fan of more straightforward games that aren't just full of filler, which Rebirth feels like it is. Anyway, I don't want to rag on Rebirth too much. This is about my love for Crisis Core, and what a great game it is. It has such a great battle system. I know it was kind of taken from the PSP game, but also upgraded to feature more of the elements from the Final Fantasy VII remake, which I loved so much on the PS4. They did a great job with this. It doesn't quite have the same graphical quality as the actual remake, but the way they took the PSP game and improved it for the PS5, and it's on the PS4 and Switch as well, is really cool. And I loved the mission-based structure as well. It reminded me a lot of my favourite Kingdom Hearts game, which is 358 over 2 days, which I also cried at the ending of. So maybe there's some correlation there with the smaller scale mission-based games by Square Enix and having those really emotional stories that I love so much. I would love to see them make another spin-off in this style. And as for some of my more recent games that I've played on the PS5 and really enjoyed, let's start with Visions of Mana, which actually only came out about a month ago. It really is that simplified JRPG experience which I really miss in some of the bigger, more grander scale games. It feels like something with the same kind of budget as Tales of Berseria, and it's just fantastic. I love the straightforward nature of it. I love the way they're telling the story in this, with basically the screens of text and the characters speaking as you're progressing from one area to the next in the game. It's a really nice, really simple method of conveying the emotions of the characters, and I think they pulled it off incredibly well. The Unreal Engine 5 graphics look stunning. There are a few issues with the way the cutscenes transition and stuff, but overall, the gameplay's great, the graphics are really nice. It's got a really nice anime aesthetic to it, which I really enjoy. All of the mana games have that aesthetic that I really like, but this is definitely one of my favourites in the series so far. I'm definitely going back and playing more of it very soon. Another game that I really enjoyed from last year was Need for Speed Unbound, and the Need for Speed series seems to be getting better and better with every release. They had a kind of dip in the middle of the PS4's life, but when they came back with Heat and now with Unbound, I really feel like they're taking the series back to how it felt in the Underground and the Hot Pursuit and the Carbon days. It really does feel like that style of Need for Speed is finally coming back, and we're finally getting developers that understand what makes such a great arcade racing experience, and I really enjoyed this one. I finished it now and I really wish there was more to do, it was that good. And the other game that I enjoyed on the PS5 actually took me quite a while to get into. That was Sonic Frontiers, and when I first played this one I actually thought it was very bad. I thought they'd messed it up. I thought the physics were broken. I really didn't like the disjointed gameplay between the open world and the individual levels, and the way the camera and the controls were different in the levels compared to the overworld. It all felt very weird and disjointed, but the more I played it, the more I understood what they were trying to do with this game, and the better it became to me. And I'm really curious about how I would feel about the game now. There's been a lot of updates since. I played it all through on day one, so I didn't get any of the benefits of all the customization stuff that they've added since then, so maybe I'll go back and replay this and see how my thoughts have changed over time. And I really can't wait to see where they take the Sonic series next. That was my PlayStation journey. I had a great time revisiting all of these amazing games for this video. Let me know your journey down in the comments below, and if you want to see Nintendo's, click up here, and if you want to see my Sega journey, then click on that side, and I'll see you all again very soon. Goodbye.